Welcome. Welcome to Cultural Thursday, the monthly cultural literacy program of Central Lakes College, where we invite people from all over the world to help us better understand the peoples, perspectives, and places of our diverse planet. I'm really glad that y'all are here with us today, and I want to give a special shout out to some special guests from the Nehishing Tribal School in Mille Lacs. Welcome. I'm glad y'all could be here with us. My name is Jason Edens, and it's my privilege to coordinate this program. So once again, thank you so much for joining us. Although I look forward to each and every one of our programs, we have a real special treat for you today. Mr. Michael Laughing Fox Charette has come from the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa in northern Wisconsin to regale us with Ojibwe stories and Ojibwe flute playing. So without further ado, please help me give a very warm welcome to Mr. Michael Charette.
Aho. Bonjour Nindanaway Maganiduk. Hello to all my relatives. Bapewa Gush Nindajinikaj. Laughing Fox is my name. Nindamigazi Dudame. I'm from the Eagle Clan. And Misquabi Kong Nindunjaba. Red Cliff is where I'm from. And it's an honor for me to come before you today and share some of our culture and our stories. You know, we're gathered here today much like that of our ancestors to share culture, stories, heritage, in the hopes that we learn from one another and pay homage to those spirits who have come before us and those people who have come before us. A long time ago, when nations would meet each other, they would sit down and they would smoke what we call a peace pipe with the idea that they had one breath, one prayer going up to the Creator. And then we would share traditions, culture, heritage. We would trade these things. We would trade stories. We would trade goods for each other's mutual survival. And that old false narrative that we were all savages and we're constantly at war with one another just isn't true. You know, what type of a warring people would carry with them items like the peace pipe? One might even say that we were in the business of meeting other cultures. I was always taught to introduce myself in the Anishinaabe language, and that's become like Ojibwe protocol now. And to give you a better understanding of the way that the Anishinaabe people are, you know, Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Ojibwe, we're all like the same people. And when we say Nindanaway Maganiduk, when we say all my relatives, we don't just mean our biological relatives, our brothers, our sisters, our aunts, our uncles, our grandparents. We're actually paying homage and respect to the living spirit that resides in all things. So I'm acknowledging that spirit that's in that river. I'm acknowledging that spirit that's in that tree. Acknowledging that spirit that resides in that rock even, because all things have a spirit. And when you have a whole continent of people believing that everything has a spirit, it makes it that much harder for us to take. Nowadays, we become a society of takers, you know, violators of that great rule, that great law of take only what you need. You know, if we followed the old ways, you know, we would take only what we need, and the world may be a better place for it. I'd like to start off today talk about the flute a little bit, what I do. And I work with a lot of different schools all over the Northwoods, and I go in and I make flutes, and I talk about our culture, and I talk about our stories. And whenever I open up these things, I always like to talk about the creation story of the flute. And we as Ojibwe people, as Anishinaabe, we have creation stories for everything out there. We have creation stories on why the raccoon wears a mask. We have creation stories on how the Apostle Islands were made. That's up by where I live. I come from the shores of Lake Superior. And we even have creation stories on why the dog smells each other's butts. It's true. It's true. But today I'm gonna share with you the creation story, one of the many creation stories of the BB guan, the flute. The flute is one of the oldest instruments out there. It's right up there with the drum, which represents the heartbeat of Mother Earth. That first sound that we hear while we're in our mother's womb. Next would be like a rattle or a shaker or a rain stick, to represent that water that we all need in order to survive. The human voice is said to be really old. I was just reading an article where they found a flute in a cave, and it carbon dated back 44,000 years ago. And it was made out of the rib bone of a cave bear. So these instruments are pretty old. And as I learned more about the flute, I learned that every culture all over Mother Earth has some sort of a flute, and they all have their own creation stories on how they came to be. And I was always taught that we have to respect and honor everybody's stories because they're all true. So a long time ago in this village, far, far away, there was this young man. And this young man was good at everything. He was good at hunting. He was good at fishing, good at gathering, But one thing he wasn't good at is he wasn't good at expressing his feelings. So one day he came back from a successful hunt, and all the village was celebrating. And as he came up, he looked across the village and he could see this young woman, and he had these feelings for her. And he thought to himself, this is it. I'm going to go up to her and I'm going to tell her how I feel about her. And so he went up to her and he starts to talk to her, and the words fail him. And he kind of gets embarrassed. So he goes on the outskirts of the village and he watches as other young men of courting age go up to her and try to get her attention and her affection. And this frustrated the young man. And he remembered in his stories that the elders had told him about a love medicine that's out there. And the love medicine was carried by the Ayabe, which is a huge albino buck that lives to the west. And he thought to himself, if he can somehow hunt this Ayabe and take this love medicine, he could present it to her. And then she would know how he felt about her. So he packed up a bunch of provisions and he went out into the woods, and he found the biggest set of elk tracks that he could find. And he said, this is it. This has got to be the Ayabe. So he started to follow those tracks. And they led him deeper and deeper into the woods, further and further away from his village. He would see a flash of white out of the corner of his eye. He'd pull back his bow and arrow, but it would be gone. Days of this went on. He'd follow those tracks. He'd see that flash out of the corner of his eye, and he'd pull back his bow and arrow, but it would be gone. Finally, he was exhausted from his trip, from his journey. And he made a fire underneath a great cedar tree. And as he sat there, listening to the crackle and the pop of the fire, thinking about his heart's desire, he was drifting off into sleep, half awake, half asleep, that in-between place of dreams. And he heard a sound out there somewhere in the distance. He went to sleep with that sound. And the next day, he woke up to a knocking. And when he opened his eyes and he looked up into that cedar tree, he could see that there was a bird on that branch. And that bird had been knocking holes into that branch. And when the bird flew away, the wind picked up, and it made that sound that he heard in his dream. He knew instantly that that's what he was looking for. He got up and he reached up into that tree and he grabbed a hold of that branch and he broke it off. And as he was studying it, he was trying to figure out how to get that sound out of it. So he started to blow on it. Nothing. He's blowing on it like this. Still nothing. He was even going like this, trying to get that wind to pass through those holes. Still nothing. So what he did next is what his elders had taught him to do. When seeking an answer, you offer something. So he grabbed some sema, some sacred tobacco, and he said a prayer to the spirit of that bird. And he offered his tobacco to the fire, and it turned his prayers to smoke, brought it up to the spirits. And as he sat there waiting for an answer, leaning against that tree, he drifted off and went to sleep again. And in his dreams, that bird came and visited him. And it asked him, what is it that you are seeking? And the young man told the spirit bird of his dilemma, told him about his heart's desire and his inability to convey his feelings to her. Talked about the young men in the village talking to her and his feelings of frustrations over this. So the spirit bird listened to him and took pity upon him and told him that he would teach him how to make the sound. He told him what kind of wood to use, how long to make it, where to put the holes in it. And he said, and when you blow into this bibiguan is the Ojibwe word for flute. When you blow into this bibiguan, you think about your heart's desire, have her here, and you feel it here. And when you blow into the bibiguan, it'll wabiguan out in the other end. It'll wabiguan out in the other end. Wabiguan is the Ojibwe word for flower. It'll flower out into the world, and people will know how you feel. So upon waking from this vision, he begins to construct the first bibiguan. And he's almost done constructing it when he has to put a piece on top of it. So he carves out a piece in the shape of a bird out of respect for that bird that had taught him how to make that flute, how to make that bibiguan. After he constructed the flute, he started to make his way back to his village. And each time that he stopped and he took a break, a bird would visit him and sing to him and encourage him to sing along. And so he learned songs from these animals out there in the woods. And finally, he made his way back to the village. And he stood up on a hill, and he looked down, and he could see everybody was working down in that village. You know, it was a change into the season. Some people were dancing wild rice. Some people were gathering berries. Some people were drying out meats. Some people were smoking fish, right? Smoke fish, not drugs, right? And as he's looking at all these villagers working, he closes his eyes, and he imagines his heart's desire here, and he feels it. And he blows into his bibiguan. That sound makes its way down from the hill, and it goes into the village. And everyone that hears that sound, they stop what they're doing because no one had ever heard anything like that before. Finally, the sound makes its way to the wigwam of the young woman. The wigwam is a traditional home of the Anishinaabe people. Made its way to the wigwam of the young woman. And as soon as she heard that sound, she knew instantly that that was for her. So she came out of her wigwam and she looked up onto the hill, and she could see that young man standing up there making this strange sound. And she knew who he was, and she always wondered why he never would talk to her. So she went up and stood next to him, closed her eyes, and she was so overwhelmed that somebody could express so much emotion without uttering a single word. And as she listened, she realized that that sound was intertwining their spirits together. Miigwech. As a little kid, I started to learn more and more about my culture. And my Nokomis, my grandmother, she would tell me stories. And she'd always tell me, I'd be a little rambunctious kid running all over the place, And she'd always tell me, hey, Bazanian, And she would say Bazanian to me so much that I actually thought that was my Indian name. Bazanian means be quiet in the Ojibwe language. She'd be like, Bazanian, I'd be like, yeah, right here. She goes, go in. Come over here now, Namadabin, sit down. Bizintan, listen. And I would listen to her. She told these stories, And she'd always, tell me, oh, you think you're so smart. She said, here's a story for you about another young man who thought he was really smart. And after we'd settle down and sit in front of her, she'd begin telling us these stories. And she said, a long time ago, there was this young boy, he thought he knew everything. This young boy's name was Winabuju. And he thought he knew everything. And he would go through the village, and he would tell everybody what to do because he knew it all. He knew everything. Some people were sitting there working on their wigwam, and Winabuju would come up and he'd start telling them how to tie their knots better. Oh, you're doing that all wrong. Go like this, do it like that. And they would tell him, oh, go in, Winabuju. Go on, Majan. Go away. You don't know anything yet. You're just a little kid. And this happened to him all over the village. He'd go up and start talking to people about making birch bark baskets. And he'd start telling them how to tie them together even better. And they'd be like, go in, Winabuju, Majan. Go away. You just don't know anything yet. And this happened to him all day. And he finally got frustrated. And at the time, he sought out counsel of his Nokomis, his grandmother. And he went out into the woods and looked for her. And he found her out there picking medicines. He said, Nokomis, I got a problem. And she said, oh, yes, Winabuju, what is it? And he said, well, when I go through the village, nobody will listen to my ideas. They all think I'm a dumb little kid, and they tell me to go away. And she goes, well, what are you asking, Winabuju? And she said, I know you're really knowledgeable in medicines. He said, is there a medicine out there that'll help me get smarter? Because when I'm the smartest man alive, everybody's going to listen to what I have to say. And they'll all have to do what I say. And she thought about this for a little bit, and she's like, you know what, Winabuju, there is a medicine out there that can help you. But I have to go out and find it. You'll have to come back later. So Winabuju, all excited, he runs out into the woods. And he's out there, he finds a nice little clearing, he's standing, and he's thinking about it, and he's thinking about how everyone's going to listen to him because he's going to be the smartest man alive. He's having all these grandiose visions of what's going to happen, what his world's going to be like. Finally, he can't take it anymore. He goes back and seeks out his Nokomis again. And he finds her in the woods again, picking medicines. And he says, Nokomis, did you find the medicine? The medicine that'll help me get smarter? And she said, why, yes, Winabuju, I did. And she reaches into her pouch, and she pulls out of her pocket. She said, eat these. These are smart berries. They'll help you get smarter. And Winabuju looked at him, and he kind of made this face, and then he went even further, and he smelled them. And he went, oh, Nokomis. He said, that's rabbit poop. And she goes, oh, Winabuju, it's working. You're getting smarter already. That was one of the first stories that I remember as a kid listening to, as my own teacher would pull out a bag full of these smart pills or smart berries and offer them to us. Of course, the kids that were the most unruly, here, have these, But joke was on us. They were only chocolate-covered raisins. I spent 2 years in the woods learning how to play the flute. And one of those lessons that I learned from my storyteller was to be quiet and to listen. And as I was out in the woods, many times that's all I would do, is I would just sit there and listen. I'd listen to the wind through the trees. I'd listen to the creek. I'd listen to the river. I'd listen to the rain drops on the canopy. And while I was sitting out there one day, I could hear some squirrels running around, chasing each other around, and I thought, I had heard stories that the flute can talk to spirits and they can talk to animals. So I thought, oh, this is the perfect time to try this out. So I started to imitate these squirrels that were out there, and I thought I would scare them away, but it didn't scare them away. they actually got more curious, and they came closer to me, as I'm imitating them. And it was so surreal to me to have this happen. I started to look at the medicine of the flutes, the medicine of our stories, the medicine of our culture. And that was one of the first stories, or the first songs that I learned while I was out there in the woods. And this next song that I'm going to share with you is called Ajitamo Waning, which means squirrel tail. And as I learned more about the flute and more about the squirrel, I learned that I was actually making their territorial calls. So they were coming up to me to check out who this big squirrel was in their territory and what they had to do to get rid of him. So this song is called Ajitamo Waning, squirrel tail. And if you listen, you can hear those squirrels in here. As I learned more and more about our culture and our history, I learned some things, I learned that we didn't become U.S. citizens until 1924. I learned that we didn't have freedom of speech until 1968. I learned that we didn't have freedom of religion until 1978. And that was only 44 years ago. Can you imagine not being able to name your children in the language of your people? To have your ceremonies, your dance, all these things outlawed? And as I started to learn about these things, I started to, and became a parent myself, I started to think about these things. And when I became a parent, we had many discussions on what we were going to call our daughter. And we did think about some names that were in English, but we thought about names too, like before first contact. And that's when we decided to name our daughter in the Anishinaabe language. And we named her Indeaki, which to us means my heart of the earth. And one of the reasons we named her this is because we wanted our friends and family to see how proud we were to be naming our child in the language. And we had hoped that it would encourage them to do the same. We had a home birth. At one time that was outlawed. We did ceremony with her afterbirth, with her belly button. And now where I'm from, the village I'm from, more and more young people are having home births. And more of our children are being named in the traditional language. Whereas me, my English name is Michael Charette. And, there's enough Michaels in the world to wrap around planet Earth twice. 2/3 of us would perish because of the water. And I've been at places where I was like, yeah, Michael, let's see all the Michaels. And half the room would be full of Michaels. So that's always interesting to have that connection as well. Yeah, right, Scooter. It's actually my middle name. I was born Scott Michael Charette. There was already one in the village. So my parents decided to name me Michael Scooter Charette. And when I asked my mother, why would you name me Scooter? You know, she always would tell me, oh, you were the fastest baby up and down the stairs of Red Cliff, and you'd scoot right out of your diaper. She had other names for me that I won't repeat. I'm sure some of you have the same names. Anyways, when I got this flute, it was given to me at a time when my daughter and her mother had moved to France. And I did all these things, all these bonding things with her, right? So me being a big tough guy, I was like, oh yeah, okay, we'll see you guys. You know, we'll do the whole visitation stuff and do all this. And when she was away from me, I had no idea the hole that it would leave in me as a father. And so I looked at the flute and I started to play. And just like in the story, I started to close my eyes and I started to envision my daughter. And I thought that if she's sleeping somewhere halfway around the world, that she would know and feel that music. She would know that her father loves her very much and thinks about her very much. And that's when I started to learn about the medicine of our culture, stories, and flute. This next song I'm going to share with you on this homemade flute is called Indea Ki, which means my heart of the earth. Kind of cutting the songs a little short so that we can move through some of these flutes. I know we only have a limited amount of time here. So I have over 20 flutes in my collection, each one made out of different materials. Each one has its own voice, its own song, its own story, and its own spirit. And a lot of times I'll get flutes in a trade, are gifted to me, or I'll make them. After I spent 2 years in the woods learning how to play them, I made it my way to the street corners, and from there, street corners to bus stops, airports, until I'm up here now on stage sharing. But I learned the medicine of the flutes by people who were stopping, just like in the story. I'd be playing on the street corner, and they'd be going from point A to point B, and they would hear that music, and they would instantly slow down, and they would listen, and they would take that moment. After I was done playing a song, they would talk to me about it, and they would ask me, you know, where does it come from? Do you know the creation story of it? They would ask me, how do you make a flute? And I used that as inspiration to learn creation stories and how to build the flutes now. And they also told me about they would be having a bad day, and this music alleviated that and took that away from them. So I started to learn about the medicine of those flutes as well. Anyways, I had a birthday once, and this guy gave me this flute. And it's a bone flute. And now when he gave it to me, he said that it was a wolf bone flute that he had scavenged out where we live. We live way out in the woods. And I was like, oh, nice, nice. And he told me that he had the other bone from the other side of the wolf, and that someday me and him would come together and we'd do like this flute duet kind of thing. And so I thought, wow, what an amazing story. So I went out into the woods and I record, you know, that's what I do. I'll record a little bit of my environment and stuff. And I was out there recording this song. I call it Wolfbone Echo. And after I had made this video of it, which you can see on YouTube under Tales of Laughing Fox. And after I had made this video, I went and I wrote this nice paragraph about the flute maker, about, that bonding experience of brothers, and this and that. And then I posted it. And then like a week later, I see he commented on the post, and it said, "Oh, wait, I forgot to tell you, it's not really a wolf bone flute." He said it's a cougar bone flute. And I said, "Oh, what?" I'm like, "Man, I just wrote this big thing and, made this video. Like, I can't change that all around now." So I just ended up leaving it. But I said, "Oh, wow, that makes sense." And he said, "Well, why is that?" I said, "Well, whenever I play this flute on a full moon, all the aunties come out." Wow. All the cougars come out. Yeah. Cougar is the Ojibwe word for auntie, right? Anyways, this has a very unique voice to it, very beautiful. And this one I'm going to share with you is called The Wolf Echo. Speaking of our animal friends, my teacher, she'd always start off her stories with like, "Back when the world was forever cold," and that to me brought to mind right away the Ice Age. They say that people have been living around the Great Lakes systems for at least the last 11,000 years. They say our DNA even goes back further than that, 20,000, 40,000 years. When the Pilgrims first arrived here, our first visitors started showing up, there was already 90 million people living here, all with their own unique forms of culture, language, agriculture, writing systems. That's another one of those narratives that they showed up and there was nothing here. But there was abundance of different flourishing peoples, cultures, migrating here and there, being pushed out of here and there. Sometimes an event would happen where a huge fire would overtake a lot, and they would avoid that, So we've been here for a long time. And my teacher would always tell us that one of the reasons that we have been here such a long time was because of the help of our animal brothers and sisters out there and their sacrifices for us. She said we're the lowest on the totem pole as far as beings on Mother Earth. We come out into the world crying. We can't stand up. We need protection. And she said we rely on our animals, brothers and sisters, and their sacrifices so that we may flourish. We use their hides to warm us. They make that ultimate sacrifice of their lives so that they can sustain our life. And our earliest stories, start with animals taking pity on us animals traveling to the highest mountain and cracking a hole in the sky so the sun could come through and warm Mother Earth. Our stories about the muskrat swimming to the bottom of the ocean and grabbing land so that we can have Turtle Island. Sacrifices. And each animal has its own wisdom. You know, each one of them has its own unique spirit and its own unique wisdom. And if we listen to that, then we learn from it. This next flute song that I'm going to share with you is called Mainga Nakwe, which means the wolf woman in Ojibwe. And I was playing once with a guy named Carlos Nakai, and he's like the grandfather of flutes. And I was asking him, you know, I can't read music or anything, and I was asking him if he's got any pointers for me. You know, I said, I got your book, but I can't really read it. He's like, oh, he heard me play. He's like, you're doing fine. Just keep playing from the heart. You know, you're on a good path. He's like, I will tell you one thing, though. And I said, oh, what's that? He said, beware the woman that gives you a flute. And I said, oh, why is that? He pointed to his wife. He's like, because I married the one that gave me one. So I went home. About 3 months later, the girl I was dating at the time, she goes, hey, Scooter, I got a gift for you. And I was like, oh. I was like, all right. And she brought out this box, and I'm like, oh, no. Look, what could it be? And I open it up, and sure enough, it's this flute, you know. And everything was going fine. Her name is Mainga Nakwe, which means the wolf woman. And everything was going fine between Mainga Nakwe and Laughing Fox till one full moon. She tried to eat Laughing Fox, and I had to get away. Barely got away with my tail intact. But like in the stories, you know, some things don't work out. But like in the stories, you know, we always play with the best feelings, the best intentions, and the best memories. And that's how I play this flute. And because it is like a wolf flute to me, I learned this song by listening to wolf packs howl back and forth to each other. Another lesson in listening to those teachers, you know, respecting their uniqueness. We got time for one more that I'm going to share with you. This is my double drone flute, and I never leave home without it. This is one of my favorites. I bring it around with me everywhere I go, everywhere I go. And like I was saying, I played in the woods for a couple years, then I made my way to street corners, and then the bus stops, and then eventually airports. And I really enjoy playing at the airports because you have those people who are going from point A to point B and moving so quickly. And I would find these corners at the airports, and I would play. And people would slow down, you know, and they would take that moment, and they would come and listen to the music. And the music of these flutes, these instruments, they transcended culture, and they transcended language, because people from all over the world were stopping and listening and asking me questions about it afterwards. It was just, I had really good experiences at these airports until people started telling me to Mahjong, get out of here. And one day I found myself at the airport, and I believe I was in Philadelphia visiting my daughter over Christmas. And my plane got stuck there, and I had to spend the night in the terminal and or outside of it. And I was playing flute, you know, and when I play, I shut my eyes and I go right back to the place where I learned it, you know, right on the shores of Lake Superior, right on the home of the Apostle Islands. And so I was had my eyes closed, and I was playing. When I opened them, there's a ring of people around me. And as I studied these people that were around me, you know, after I finished my song, I noticed that they were kind of rough looking. You know, their clothes were dirty. I can kind of almost smell them. And then I realized, you know, that they were homeless. And I come from up north, and we don't have too much of that, so it was another cultural thing for me. And this guy come up to me, and he said, hey, man. He said, my name's Curtis. He said, that's some good flute playing. And I said, oh, hey, well, thank you, Curtis. My name's Laughing Fox. You know, and he kind of looked at me really weird. And he goes, hey, how'd you know my name was Curtis? You know? And that kind of freaked me out, like, because I haven't been in that kind of environment. But it made me think about, you know, their situations and, you know, what their mental health and what got them to be there in that point, you know, in time. And I looked around at everybody else, and they kind of seemed to be in that same situation on Christmas Eve of all holidays. And then it dawned on me that it really didn't matter where they came from, because in that moment, being in that circle, you know, we were together, and we were sharing that moment with each other and being in each other's presence. And to me, that was one of the most greatest experiences that I had. And this song doesn't have any title to it. It just has this story and this expression. Miigwech. I believe that's all that we have time for today. And again, it's been a great honor to be able to come before you and be able to present some of our cultures and our stories and talk about some of these flutes and things that have helped me along my journey as far as like spiritual tools are concerned. So Miigwech again, been a great audience.
Yes, sir, we do, in fact. Yes, we do. Laughing Fox, thank you so much. If you can spare a couple more minutes, we definitely have a couple questions. There are about 3,000 questions online, but for those of you that are able to stick around for just a moment, we do have a couple questions from the audience as well, starting with Mary Sam. So Curtis, if you can please help me with this right here. Could I have a mic runner, please, to run this to Mary Sam up the stairs? Thank you so much.
Miigwech. Is this on?
Yep, it should be.
Miigwech Scooter.
Oh,
Majitazi Bikwe Digitakaz. I'm Mary Sam. I'm the Dean of Students here at Central Lakes College. And I want to thank you, Michael, for being here today. Number one, it's just really been an honor and an honor to watch you grow up over the last number of years. I haven't seen you since you were a younger Scooter. And it's really, he was out of diapers by that point, just so you know. But it's really nice to have you here. But we've got a lot of younger people in the audience, and I know that your journey has gone like this, like many of ours has, right? What advice do you have to our young people in the audience today about trusting yourself, right? Trusting other people, and finding your path? Miigwech.
well, I was talking earlier about having spiritual tools, and some of those spiritual tools for me was learning more and more about our culture, and to the point where like even my name, Bapewa Gush, has become a form of empowerment, and I've used that. You know, I use it on stage too up here and use it in its English form of Laughing Fox, but that's one of many things that we can use today that'll give us the spiritual tools that'll equip us to deal with those things that life deals us. You know, the harder things, the grief, the loss, generational traumas. You know, all those things can be found within our language. They can be found within our ceremonies. They can be found within our music. And, you know, we're all indigenous from somewhere. And I think that's important to note, too, for our non-indigenous folks here. You know, at one time, when they were coming over here, they were escaping a certain kind of oppression. And without having the right tools to deal with this, you know, it kind of like leaked out onto everything that they were doing. When they came over, the immigrants came over on the ships, they too were told they can no longer speak their German heritage or their Finnish heritage, and they're American now, and they had to forget that. So in a lot of ways, we're in that same boat where we're trying to reclaim our spirits. You know, we're trying to figure out, you know, who we are and what works for us, really. And I said earlier that we had, you know, we respect and honor everybody's creation stories, everybody's stories, because they're all true, and they're all a source of empowerment to us, all a source of having spiritual tools. So, Miigwech.
Other questions from the audience? We have a couple. Yes, sir. Please. We have a mic runner coming your way.
Miigwech. I have a three-part question. While you were playing your flutes, I don't know if this happened to anybody else in the crowd, but I'm heterosexual, but made me want to cuddle with you for some reason. Did you feel that same way?
It's all in the eye of the beholder, you know.
Did you at least want to give me a hug?
The flutes are medicine, and yes, of course. Love to give you a hug.
Miigwech Niji. Second part question I forgot. Third, you said that you were hitchhiking and hopping trains and sleeping in alleyways and, doing the airport thing. And I actually happened upon you. I heard you on a podcast. It was called Oatmeal and Bacon Grease. And it seemed like you just kind of blew up after that. And now you're traveling all over the place, doing all kinds of shows. I just wanted to ask you how you, what kind of thanks, you've given the Creator for that.
Well, I'm always grateful every day that I can wake up and, live this life. In a weird way, there was a time when I had gotten sick and I didn't know if I was going to be able to keep on doing this. And that shifted gears for me. It made me look at like I have a second chance to be able to be out there and share things. And ever since I was a little kid, my teachers had always said, listen, because this could be you in these positions and telling these stories and, passing on that information to the next generations. And, some of those teachers are no longer with us, and, how true that is. And of course, the podcast, Oatmeal and Bacon Grease, ladies and gentlemen,
wonderful
this
podcast,
is
everybody.
Hudson Gauthier of the Oatmeal and Bacon Grease podcast. So
Thank you.
he's helped me to get to this spot in life.
I thought of my second question. It's a little bit complicated, if I can remember it. There's saints out there, but Saint. I'm not too cultured in that, but Saint Augustine, Saint Francis, Santa Claus. Or Saint Nicholas. But they don't start their lives out as saints. Well, for the most part, they make mistakes in their life, and throughout their life they grow, and they learn from those mistakes, and eventually they reach that level of being. In our culture, how do you think you reach that level?
Well, I don't think that I've reached that level. I think that I've just been a consistency of sharing, as well as listening to our elders talk and listening to their stories. One of my good friends and teacher once told me that we're like a grain of sand on this beach, and we all only know just a little bit, as much as that grain of sand. And it takes all of us collectively coming together and working together to be able to get through some of these harder things that we face in life. And I bring up again the generational trauma, because that is so relatively new, and not a lot of people know that we did not have freedom of religion until 1978. When I discuss these things with other people, they just have no idea. Even people from my own village will say that when they're reading through the history books, and they're reading about Indians, Native Americans, they thought they were reading about somebody else, not themselves, because that was the whole colonization process that overtook it. And I think that when you're saying, about that kind of a teacher position, we all share that, and we all pass that along. So my grandmothers passed it along. Now I'll pass it along, and some of you guys in this audience too that have listened will pass these stories along, and that's how it's done. We share these stories that go back generation to generation to generation. It goes back so far we don't even know how far back it goes. The Ice Age, beyond that, back to the universe when it was dark. The Creator would send out His voice. So, it's in our stories, it's in our language. Oh, me good.
Well, I want to thank you all for joining us today so very much, but more importantly, I want to ask you all to join me in thanking Laughing Fox for his time, energy, talents, and sharing today. Thank you so very much.
Oh, me good. Me good.
Y'all are more than welcome to stick around if you have individual questions for Laughing Fox. You're more than welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us today.